All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Kendra, for sharing your story before this. And I just want to introduce Aleah Lavalley-Lewis. She is a friend of mine as we interned together last summer at TD Bank. We have even spoken on a panel together regarding Indigenous environmental racism. So I'm very inspired of Aleah and her hard work ethic being in law school. I will hand it off to Aleah and let her introduce herself.
Amazing, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see that? Yeah, okay. So Ani, Aleah Lavalley-Lewis, Indigenous Toronto and Donjaba. My name is Aleah Lavalley-Lewis and I'm from Toronto. And I'm really excited to be here today to speak to you guys about Afro Indigenous Futurism. So kind of a presentation overview. I'm just going to talk a bit about myself, talk about Afro Indigenous Futurism, Indigenous Futurism, then put that together and kind of talk about what that means as Afro Indigenous Futurism, talk about my journey, some challenges that I've overcome, and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Aleah, sorry, one sec. We just can't see your screen. Do you want to try one more time?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Can you see it now?
We can see it. Yeah, thank you.
No worries. So a bit about me. My dad is an immigrant from Jamaica, and my mom is French and Indigenous. I'm Anishinaabe, Algonquin, and a member of Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation. I went to University of Toronto for my undergraduate degree. I did a major in Criminology and Sociolegal Studies and a double minor in Sociology and Indigenous Studies. I just graduated in April of 2021. And now I'm attending Osgoode Hall Law School. A bit of what my experience has been so far, only started in September, but a few extracurriculars that I've been involved in would be the Osgoode Hall Law Journal as an associate editor. I'm a first-year representative for the OISA, which is Osgoode Indigenous Students Association. And I've participated in a few negotiation competitions. I actually just finished one last night. So those are pretty fun to do. In terms of work experience, as mentioned, I worked at TD Insurance for the past 3 years. I've done different roles there. I started off in customer strategy, then I moved to acquisition, which is kind of like marketing. And last summer I worked in claims litigation, which was a great experience because I got to work alongside lawyers who are dealing with insurance claims, bodily injury files, stuff like that.
Aleah, sorry. I am so sorry to interrupt. Do you have the PowerPoint? Can you open it up on the PowerPoint tab? We're just seeing the main screen on the Hopin event.
The main screen on the Hopin event?
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
I have my PowerPoint open, so I'm not sure why. It's not showing.
Okay. I mean, we could just roll with it. That works.
Let me try. Can you see it now?
Oh, yeah, I see it. I see it.
Okay.
Good to go. Awesome. Sorry about that. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks for letting me know. And yeah, so what I'm going to be speaking about today is kind of an intersectional perspective about both Black and Indigenous identities. And so intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. And so it's not that, you know, just being Black, just being Indigenous, just your socioeconomic status, your sexuality. It's the way in which all of these things combine to create your present circumstances, whether that's disadvantage or advantage. And so what is Afrofuturism? I had to start by breaking this up because quite honestly, I wasn't entirely sure. And so this was a great kind of research project for me to get into. And so I wanted to break it up and think about, well, where did Afro-Indigenous Futurism or Afrofuturism itself start? And it was a term that was first coined by Mark Derry in his 1994 essay, Black to the Future. You can see a picture of an example of Afrofuturism work on the side there. And the term was first defined as speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of the 20th century technoculture, and more generally, African American signification that appropriates images of technology and a prosthetically enhanced future. So what does all of that mean? Today, an example would be Black Panther. It's art that has an underlying theme of technology, and it's depicting a world in which it's kind of looking at the question, what would happen without colonialism, and what would, in this case, Wakanda look like without that. But it has had a shift in meaning since its conception. Womack here has a few really good quotes that I wanted to share about what Afrofuturism means to her. And she thinks that it's a way of looking at the future and all their alternate realities through a Black cultural lens. It can be part of critical race theory, and in other respects, it's an epistemology as well. And overall, it's a mode of self-healing and self-liberation. It's the use of imagination that is most significant because it helps people to transform their circumstances. And so in that, she's talking about agency. It's significant because historically people of African descent were not always incorporated into many storylines about the future. And so what's the purpose? Again, there's some really beautiful art here that I wanted to show that depicts Afrofuturism. And it evaluates the past and future to create better conditions for the present generation of Black people through the use of technology. And it's often presented through art, music, and literature. And so next, I wanted to kind of dive into what Indigenous Futurism specifically is. And this term was first used by an Anishinaabe professor, Dr. Grace Dillon, in the book Walking the Clouds, an ethology of Indigenous science fiction. And so similar to Afrofuturism, it's an artistic movement. It can include novels, video games, comic books, and more. And it explores various questions. So for example, what would Turtle Island look like if it had never been colonized? And it's just a way of exploring these socio-political themes through art and expressing that. And so here, Dr. Darius Little Badger is saying, both in and outside fiction, we are pushed to the past tense. The reality is, many Indigenous cultures in North America survived an apocalypse. The key word is survived. Any future with us in it, triumphant and flourishing, is a hopeful one. So again, it's depicting Indigenous resilience through different themes of literature and art, and just showcasing their survivance. And now, what is Afro-Indigenous Futurism? And so quite honestly, in my research, I found that it's something that's not talked about that much as a topic in itself. So there's nothing that's really formally theorized about it. And so I can speak about it from my perspective and what I think it means. And I kind of see it as a social movement involving a lot of community. I wasn't even really aware of the term Afro-Indigenous until maybe like 2 years ago when I started meeting other people who identified as both Black and Indigenous. And even last year, I was asked to provide like a little bio about myself for an Instagram account that features a lot of Afro-Indigenous success. And it was through that I kind of found a sense of community, because there were so many people who ended up following me on Instagram and messaging me. And I realized that like there is like a subgroup of people who identify like this, and they have like really strong bonds and relationships with each other. And so, yeah, it's basically people who identify from both like an African descent and Indigenous descent. And I think Afro-Indigenous Futurism really encapsulates decolonizing from Western assertions of what it is to look or be Indigenous. I think a lot of the time, the kind of Western perception of what being Indigenous looks like can be rooted in a lot of anti-Blackness. And I think that's something that a lot of us have to think about going forward, and not excluding people who are of like darker skin tone or mixed with African ancestry who are also Indigenous. And so I think something important is representation, which I'll touch on a bit later. Acceptance. I think that means acceptance both within the broader Indigenous community of realizing, some biases that we might have. And also acceptance if you do identify as Afro-Indigenous and realizing like that doesn't take away from your indigeneity in any way. And yeah, so I think that there's great potential for this topic to be explored further academically. But as a law student, something that we like to do is give real life examples. So I'm going to be doing that in a few slides. I really like this quote from Keisha Irwin, so I wanted to explore that. In it, they say, "Black is not a monolith, and I also don't want to pan-indigenize, so I use Afro-Indigenous to connect to other people who also have similar experiences in terms of experiencing anti-Blackness and also anti-Indigenous erasure on this land." And so I think a core theme with Afro-Indigenous futurism is just the shared common experience of experiencing both anti-Indigenous sentiments and anti-Blackness. So Afro-Indigenous futurism in action. When the whole Black Lives Matter movement started gaining a lot of traction, both in the US and in Canada, I think that this was a really good example of seeing both Indigenous and Black communities coming together. In the light of the events with George Floyd, I saw a lot of people, both like in social media and on the streets at protests from both backgrounds, really coming together. And I think that there's a lot of shared experiences between both the Black community and Indigenous community with racism, systemic racism, discriminatory policies. And so it was really great to see those two communities really come together and support each other in that time. Why is Afro-Indigenous representation important? Some of you might be familiar with the Sephora Ad campaign that came out last year. It was to celebrate National Indigenous History Month, and I think it's a really, really beautiful ad, and you can see it displayed here on the screen. But there was some concerns from the Black community or specifically the Afro-Indigenous community about representation, because the ad kind of symbolizes anti-Blackness and colorism in some ways, in just the sense that there's no Afro-Indigenous representation. And it kind of is showing that, proximity to whiteness is kind of the Western standard of beauty. And, like people from different darker skin colors and Afro-Indigenous people shouldn't be an afterthought. And so I think that there's an opportunity here to learn from that. And I know some of you are probably business students, so thinking in the future of representation, what that looks like, and representing not just one type of person, but like other people from that community as well. And so talking a bit about my journey, I grew up not very connected to my Indigenous culture. I think that my mom had some concerns about me being half Black, and how that would be received from people in the community. And so she didn't, I think she was just protective of that. And so me trying to figure out my connection to my Indigenous culture was sort of a journey that I had to take by myself. And so I did that through different ways. A lot of it was through education. I remember in high school taking my first Indigenous Studies class, and my teacher was Métis, and he was amazing. And he gave me a lot of books to read, and we talked a lot about different topics. And so that kind of first sparked my academic interest in Indigenous topics. And that was sort of one of my first like non-familial Indigenous relationship that I had. And work experience was a huge part of that as well. As I talked a bit, I was part of the Indigenous internship program at TD Insurance, and I met so many amazing Indigenous people through that experience. And like Jessica said, we got to work on presentations together. And so that was a great like networking type of thing. And I'm still friends with a lot of people from that program today. And I also got to do some volunteering, like setting up a powwow, speaking at different events. It just, helps you to get connected to that community. And so a lot of it has to do with reconciling both identities. I felt like a lot of the times when I was in Indigenous spaces, maybe I was kind of overlooked or like I would have to go out of my way to prove that I was Indigenous, whether it be like wearing earrings or making sure that my hair was straightened. I remember like for one of my interviews, I straightened my hair just so I I don't know, I guess trying to look less Black, and in that sense trying to look more Indigenous, which kind of, I guess, symbolizes the fact that there is like a Western conception of what being Indigenous looks like, and that is not being in proximity with Blackness. In terms of choosing a career choice, I witnessed a lot of interactions with the criminal justice system within like my own family. And I remember a key turning point for me was the case of Trayvon Martin. And that was the first time I kind of saw that injustice unfold in like real time, watching that court case and thinking like, that's really terrible. And I want to be a part in being able to change that, which is why I ended up taking criminology. And so I thought that I wanted to be a criminal lawyer, but after, I guess, doing my undergrad in criminology, I kind of realized that I didn't really want to partake in the criminal justice system. And I think that there were other ways that I could go about my passions of advancing, you know, social justice and those type of issues. And so now I'm working more towards a focus in business law, but also, learning about class actions like water claims, land claims, those type of things are very interesting to me. So I'm exploring that still. And so I guess in terms of my career goals and challenges that I've faced, I would say that a lack of resources is definitely one of them. I don't think I realized how differently people are brought up until going to law school, and it was really shocking to me. Like growing up, I had what I needed to have, but just coming to law school and realizing there are people who went to private school for their whole lives, and there are people who have cottages and they've inherited property already, and like it was just like something I never really thought about. And so like growing up, I didn't have tutors. I'm a first generation student. Like my parents couldn't help me with my homework, those type of things. Like it makes a really big difference. And so I think something that's important is just resilience and perseverance, and knowing that whatever it is that you want to pursue, you definitely can do it. And I think something that's helped me a lot along the way is having really great mentors who have helped me. So one of my mentors from TD actually helped me study for like the LSAT, asked like I could go to her with any questions that I had, with personal statements, connecting me with people for interviews and that type of stuff. It really helps to have someone who's on your side in that sense. And so that is all that I really have, but I would be happy to answer any questions, whether it's about my background, law school, work experience, any of that.
So I don't see any questions right now, but we can moderate the chat after. But everyone's just saying great job in the chat. So yeah, thank you so much, Aleah. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to attend this event for the IBSS. The main goal is obviously to amplify Indigenous voices. So we thank you again for taking the time out of your day.
Thank you.
All right. And then we will be back at 1 p.m. for our nutrient presentation with Lyle Akous. See you guys then.